Facebook and LinkedIn. And the highest number of people come in through search, and that's usually Google. And the higher your stories appear on Google, the more traffic you get to your site. And publishers spend a lot of time trying to raise their ranks on Google. They do that through something called search engine optimization. For example, there are a lot of people who publish on our site who also publish the same articles on their personal website. But when you search for that story, it's much more likely that the Forbes version is going to be higher on Google than their personal site. And that's because we have a lot of people whose job it is to make sure that our stories appear high up on Google. There are some sites, which you may have heard of, people disparagingly call them content farms, whose entire business model is based on creating content specifically directed at Google. So there's a company called Associated Content, sold to Yahoo in 2010, not for $1 like Newsweek, but for $100 million. And they have thousands of freelance contributors that pick topics from a list of assignments that are generated from internet search requests. One of these sites you probably have come across on the internet is called eHow, which has answers to practical questions like home remedies for earaches, a lot of medical topics, how to fix your car engine. And the companies have devised algorithms that can predict how much ad revenue each assignment, each one of those stories will generate. And they pay the freelancer something like 15 to 20 bucks per assignment. But they won't assign the story unless they know it'll generate more than $20 in revenue. So it's a very kind of precise way of generating content. And because of Google, journalists now have a lot more information about what readers want to know. And this makes a lot of people uncomfortable in the media world. Rather than writers and editors dictating what readers should be reading, you now really have a reversal of that, with readers dictating what journalists should be writing about. And that's been quite a drastic change in the role of journalists today. So I'll talk about what our new newsroom looks like today. First of all, there's just one newsroom. The magazine staff and the website staff have been consolidated. We're all in one building. The number of writers and editors has shrunk from several hundred down to 60. And the editorial process has been streamlined substantially, both in print and online. The fact-checking department was eliminated. Magazine writers are now responsible for checking their own facts. But the biggest changes have really been online. We shifted from a very cumbersome system for publishing our stories to a much easier to use platform, which is called WordPress. And with that system, the writers not only write and publish their own stories, but they're also even responsible for putting the photos in the story. So we have a program which you write your story, and then there's a software program that analyzes the text, and then it suggests a photo to you, and you click on that photo, and it goes up online. So it's a very quick, streamlined system. And it's a process that used to require the involvement of many people. You had to have copy editors, you had to have photo editors. Now it's all done by one person. So exploiting this technology has really helped to reduce the cost of producing the content. We've also scaled up the volume of stories, as I referenced before, by bringing on hundreds of contributors who are all experts in various fields. Some of them are paid, and they're paid by the amount of audience that they generate, but most of them are unpaid. And usually they do it and they agree to write for free because of the publicity they get from posting their content on our site. And like the staff writers, these contributors are also responsible for everything involved in the posts that they write for us, including promoting their work and developing an audience, which they typically do through social networking sites like Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and other blogs. So we have now about 800 outside contributors, and they really run the spectrum. We have a prominent cardiologist who writes for us about drug safety issues. We've got an auto exec who writes about cars. We've got a Nigerian journalist who writes about business in Africa. So we've got quite a range. And like the staff writers, they publish directly to our site. And as I said, the process is far more streamlined, and it happens very quickly so they can react immediately to breaking news. So how does this new newsroom affect us legally? Well, of course, the less editorial review, the more potential for mistakes, and therefore the higher potential for lawsuits. But that said, unlike print, mistakes on the internet can be easily corrected. And that's what we do. When we are advised of errors, we correct them immediately, we admit that we are wrong, and they're resolved quite quickly. And that's how we avoid many lawsuits. One of the other things we do is we give people a right to respond. So unlike in print, which is difficult to do because of the scarcity, because there's a limited number of pages, online, if somebody's upset about an article that we published about them, there's a lot of opportunity for them to respond to it. And thirdly, we also take advantage of the different legal framework that applies to content that's written online. There are far greater statutory protections that apply to what's on our website and that don't apply to what's in our magazine. And one of those you may not be familiar with, but you encounter the benefits of it every day, and it's a landmark piece of legislation. It's known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, and that's a law that was passed back in 1996, which protects publishers from liability for content published by third parties on their sites. And it was passed in reaction to a number of cases, decisions back in 1995, which held websites like AOL responsible legally for libelous statements that were posted on bulletin boards on sites like AOL and Yahoo. And Congress decided that it would be impossible for those sites to monitor every post that was made on their sites, and it would really stifle expression on the internet if we held the sites accountable for everything that was, every statement that was on those sites. And so they decided to give a safe harbor to publishers for content that came from third parties. And it's that law that now shields websites like Twitter, like Facebook, like the online review sites from liability for what users post online. And we at Forbes also avail ourselves of the protections of that statute. There's another statute that applies in the copyright context, and that's called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And it similarly gives us a safe harbor for infringing content that happens to be on our site. With copyright, we are copyright. We have our own copyrighted content, so it's sort of we're on both sides of that issue. We get requests from other people who say that we're improperly hosting infringing content, and we take it down. We similarly send those types of requests to other websites that are republishing our content without authorization. There's another bill that's now being contemplated in Congress, which you may have heard about, called SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act. That's been stalled for the moment, but what that bill would do would be to give the Justice Department the power to go after foreign rogue websites that are willfully committing copyright infringement and counterfeiting. And it goes one step further than that. It would require U.S. companies to cut off ties with those sites. So it's more drastic than the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And there are a number of sites like Google and Wikipedia that are protesting that legislation. They think it goes way too far, and it would require them to spend a lot of effort monitoring everything on their site. From our perspective, we haven't taken a position on statute. Much like the DMCA, we're on both sides of the question, so we're kind of taking a wait-and-see approach. Okay. Let me talk about just a couple other legal issues that we've encountered. So, as I said, with the internet, most of the time we're able to correct any mistakes that we have very quickly. And the more serious issues still tend to come from print. A few years ago, Steve Forbes wrote a book called Power, Ambition, and Glory, in which he compared current CEOs to great leaders, thank you, in history.
It's probably vodka.
One of the people that he profiled in the book was a fellow you may have heard of, the former CEO of Tyco, Dennis Kozlowski. This is the fellow, you know, with the $15,000 shower curtain. So Kozlowski was mentioned in the book in a passage in which Forbes compared him to Alexander the Great. And clearly, Kozlowski's got a lot of time on his hands because he's now in prison. He was not happy with the passage, and he sued Steve Forbes and the publisher for libel. You know, we frequently get letters from people in prison. You know, usually they want a subscription or they want to know why they're not on the cover. But it's infrequent that we get sued from people in prison. So the book said, for example, that Kozlowski was serving time in federal prison, and Kozlowski took great issue with that. He said, that's absolutely false. I'm in state prison. And then the other thing the book talked about, which Kozlowski took great offense at, was the $1 million birthday party that he had hosted for his wife in Sardinia. This is the party where they had a statue of David that was urinating vodka. In the book, Forbes talks about the fact that Kozlowski had disguised this party as a shareholder meeting. And Kozlowski says that's absolutely false. I did not disguise it as a shareholder meeting. It was an employee retreat. So he sued us, and the lawsuit went forward. Ultimately, the publisher decided to publish on their website some minor revisions that corrected those mistakes, and it was resolved that way. Had he proceeded, it would not have gone anywhere. It would have been easily dismissed, and that's because in this country, in order to have an actionable claim for libel, you have to prove not only that what was published about you was false, but that it was substantially false. And in this instance, and what the judge would look at is the sting, the gist or the sting of the libel. The gist or the sting has to be substantially false. And here, the distinction between whether you're in federal prison or whether you're in state prison is a distinction without a difference. The point is, you're in prison. I'll just talk about one other type of legal issue that we encounter frequently. And that is, we get subpoenas from people who are involved in lawsuits or for government agencies that are often asking us for information that we've uncovered during the course of our reporting. And there are statutes that protect the press from turning over that information, and because of those statutes and because of the First Amendment, we rarely have to turn over anything that's in our files. And during the recession, there were a lot of people suing each other, of course, and there was a spike in people coming to us asking us for information for our files, and often they relate to people who are on our rich list. And we had an interesting experience with respect to a fellow who's on our rich list. He was a cabbie turned billionaire real estate developer named Tamir Sapir. And we had him, back in 2010, we had him on our rich list with a net worth of $1.4 billion. That included his $44 million mansion on Fifth Avenue. And the same year, the real estate market in Manhattan was in a tailspin, and he had a number of creditors suing him for $340 million. And interestingly, although he was on our list at $1.4 billion in net worth,